Well, good morning, everyone. Hopefully, I got your attention a little bit this morning. And just one of the things about movies, they have a way of influencing us. They can influence us positively. They can influence us negatively. And sometimes they can possibly influence us positively, but maybe not the way that, for me personally, that maybe my parents would have wished for, or Sunday school teachers, the way they would have drawn it up. But that was one of the cases for one of my favorite movies as a kid was Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Are people familiar with, are you guys okay? Okay. Well, to maybe let you appreciate how this movie influenced me, and actually it got me excited about the Bible and got me digging into God's word along with some of my friends, but to fully understand this, I've got to take you back to just this pretty weird and wild place, a place I like to call the 80s. Do some people remember? Okay, people remember the 80s? Okay. So way back in the strange world of the 80s, when it came to movies, it was a little bit different than the way things are now. You couldn't stream movies from your phone or from your computer or from TV, like have a million movies just at the click of a mouse. Back then, if you missed it in the theater, then you would have to wait years just for it to show on TV, if they would ever show that movie on TV at all. But in the 80s, they came up with this amazing invention. It was called the VCR. And it came in two types, beta and VHS. And I remember as a kid, it was a big deal. And this was before you went to the video rental store to just rent the movies. This is actually when we used to go there and rent the machine as well. Do people remember renting the machines from this? So when I was a kid and I had a family of four, it was a big deal, especially birthday weekends, because what we got to do on birthday weekends was on Friday, we went to the store, we rented a VCR machine, and we got to rent 3 movies to watch. Now, usually Friday night, that would be sleepover night. You'd bring your friends over, party night, and then we would have movie marathon. And if those were good movies that you chose, then, we watched them over and we've got as many rounds in watching those movies until we had to take that thing back on Monday morning. But it was a big deal. And I remember this one particular birthday, I was about 9 or 10, and I was really excited because one of the movies I got to bring home for the weekend was Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, I do want to, I can say this, I had to apologize to the kids in the first service, but the kids are dismissed in the second service. But if you remember this movie, and one of the final scenes in the movie was as a kid, and again, I'm about 9, 10 years old, was really probably the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. So just to remind you, if you haven't seen it, maybe some of you are trying to forget it. I chose not to show that scene this morning, and you'll understand why. But at the end of the movie, the Nazis have the Ark. Indiana Jones and his love interest, they're captured, and they're going to open up the Ark of the Covenant. And first of all, they open it up, and it's nothing, and it looks like sand. And then all of a sudden something weird happens. The power starts going out, and then all of a sudden this wind kind of blows, and then it turns into this really ghost thing. And then the cool part, everybody's face starts to melt and they die, right? It's this face melting power that comes from the Ark. And people remember that scene? Some people are trying to forget that scene. I chose not to show that scene this morning. I really wanted to, but here's this. But I also like my job, so I don't want to go. But this is where it gets a little bit weird, because we're 9 and 10. You're like, oh, I can't watch. Oh, that was terrible. That was awful. Who wants to watch it again? And so we're all sitting there, little boys, late at night in the dark, and we keep rewinding and watching this face melting scene from the Ark. Now, part of my party, I remember having 2 of my best friends growing up. Their names were Scott McLean and Brad Smith, and we did everything together back in those days, and we went to the same church. We're in the same Sunday school, and I remember afterwards thinking whoa, that was so cool. Indiana Jones is so cool. I wish the Bible was just as cool as Indiana Jones. But then all of a sudden, well, maybe it is. They had to get that story from somewhere. what does the Bible actually say about this Ark of the Covenant? And my dad, who was a pastor, I remember the three of us, we went like, hey, Dad, can you help us find in the Bible where it has the Ark? So he's opening it up and we looking at all the different references. I remember him even getting his Bible encyclopedia that's got a picture kind of similar like you see in this in the movie. And he's showing us, and we're like, wow, this is cool. And it helped us find really the story that we're going to look at this morning in First Samuel chapter 4 and some of the chapters that follow, where we actually see some of the power of this incredible Ark of the Covenant. Now, for those who are joining us in the summer, we're doing a series called Forgotten Bible Stories. And we're looking at some of the stories of the Bible, but some of the less familiar ones, some of the ones you don't always hear in Sunday school. I'm grateful to Pastor Dan and Elijah, one of our Bible students who've preached the last 2 Sundays. Last week was Elijah, and I liked how Elijah introduced his story. He gave some of the key characters of the story before he introduced it. And I just want to say, now, obviously, the key character in this story we're going to read is God, but you could say the main character is this box. It's this Ark of the Covenant. Maybe just before we jump in, as much as I appreciated Indiana Jones' lesson on the Ark, there were some things he got right. There were a few things he got wrong, and we'll kind of tease those out a little bit this morning. But maybe just let me share you what was the Ark of the Covenant. First of all, we read about it for the first time in Exodus chapter 25. In Exodus chapter 25, God commands Moses and the Israelites to build this tabernacle. This is before the temple that he mentions, but this tabernacle, this is really basically a large tent, but a movable structure that would serve as sort of a movable temple that would go along with the Israelite people. And then part of this tabernacle structure would be in the center, what we call the holy place, the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. And in this center area, this most holy section, they were to carve this incredible sacred chest. And it would be overlaid with gold. There was descriptions of how it was looked. The most noticeable one, and you saw in the video screen, you can see it there, were these 2 angels or cherubims with their outstretched wings touching one another. Now, in the ark contained 3 very valuable possessions. First of all, there was another golden jar that contained some of the manna that God used to feed the Israelites on their exodus away from Egypt. It did contain probably not the original 10 commandments that Moses smashed, but again, a copy of the 10 commandments were placed in there. And on Father's Day, we talked about Aaron and his budding staff. Aaron's staff was also placed in this sacred chest. The other thing that we note is in the Bible, I should just mention, with it being stuck in this place in the center, which was called the Holy of Holies, it was only able to be accessed once a year on the most holiest day of the year, and it was only by the high priest or members of the high priest's family. And they would do it on, again, a day that is still honored today in Jewish tradition, the day of Yom Kippur, right? The Day of Atonement, where the high priest would go in and make a special sacrifice, and not just for individual sins, but for the sins of the entire nation. So that would take place there. The other thing that the Bible says that the ark is referenced with 2 other names. Number 1 is the mercy seat. So again, the top of the ark where the angels were on, that again was this picture where God's mercy instead of his judgment would be poured out. It represents, again, when the high priest would make atonement for his people, they would receive God's mercy. Again, it's the place where God would dispense either judgment or mercy back to the people of the land. The second thing is that it was referred to as God's footstool. And it's this idea that, the earth cannot contain the glory of God. But what they did, it was symbolized basically God's presence with his people, basically where his foot touched on earth. Again, so it represented the most holy and sacred place in all the earth. Pretty impressive. Now, here's another little side. It wasn't out of the ordinary for people in the ancient world, regardless of what God it was you worshiped, that you would have a central section. If you've ever traveled in the Middle East or across the Mediterranean, whether it be in Egypt, whether it be in Greece, or whether it be in Turkey, and you visited sites of these ancient temples, one of the things that you'll notice is just about every single temple follows the same design. There'd be different courts, different chambers. There's one for the general people, then there'd be one just for the priests, and then there would be sort of this sacred place, which would be really only for the high priest and for the symbol of that god. But just about every other temple, they would put an image or statue of their god in this most sacred place. But remember, the second commandment for the Israelites was, thou shalt not make any image of the Lord your God. So instead, an image of their God was this sacred chest, right? This sacred seat or footstool where the presence of God touches down. So that's a little bit of what this ark was and what it represented. Maybe just quickly again, let me mention where and when these events took place. I'm going to put just a little time chart here. This is just very generic. There's always some arguing about dates and stuff. So if you're looking in your study Bible, like, that's not my study Bible, says that's okay. I'm just trying to be rounding up and doing it that way. But if you remember, you got Abraham. We looked about the founding fathers a couple months ago. And then we had Moses, and he leads the people out of Egypt into just to the brink of the promised land. Then you have Joshua, who's the military commander, takes them into the land. And then after Joshua, there's this long period of time between Joshua and then the time of the kings. And the people are not doing too good. They sin, they mess up, they call out to God, and then the surrounding armies will take over Israel and oppress them. And so then they call out, and God sends in this judge or this hero to save them. Well, in the same way, this is taking place just shortly before the times of kings, and it's in this time of judges. And in the same way, the Israelites are sinning. They have messed up. They're calling to God for help, deliverance specifically from their good old rivals, the Philistines. But instead of God sending, a final judge to help rescue them, he basically sends them his ark, his sacred box, along with a final judge who will rise up, probably the best of them all, Samuel, to help deliver the people of Israel. So I'm going to pick things up in 1 Samuel chapter 4. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but we're going to move pretty fast through these texts, and I'm going to just read bits and pieces. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation because it just tells the story very, very simply and easily to grasp. And the first act is what happens to the ark itself. And I love the way it starts up. It says, at the time of Israel, there was a war with the Philistines. The Israelite army was camped near Ebenezer, and the Philistines were at Aphek. The Philistines attacked and defeated the army of Israel, killing 4,000 men. After the battle was over, the troops retreated to their camp, and the elders of Israel asked, why did the Lord allow us to be defeated by the Philistines? Then they said, hey, let's bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh. If we carry it into battle with us, it will save us from our enemies. So again, Israelites are there. They're in battle mode against the Philistines. They have just had a bad loss. And they're like, what is on? Why did God let us lose? And then before they ask that, they say, hey, maybe now is the time to bring out our secret weapon. Let's bring out the ark. And remember, if you just watched Indiana Jones, and we're told whatever nation, whatever army possesses this box, they're going to be invincible. So they think this will be the clue. Let's see what happens. Verse 5, when all the Israelites saw the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord coming into their camp, their shouts of joy was so loud it made the ground shake. And then listen to how the Philistines' army responded. Verse 7, this is a disaster. We have never had to face anything like this before. Help! Who can save us from these mighty gods of Israel? They are the same gods who destroyed the Egyptians with plagues when Israel was in the wilderness. Fight as never before, Philistines. If you don't, we will become the Hebrew slaves just as they have been ours. Stand up like men and fight. Okay, so here it is again, the Philistines versus the Israelites. The sacred ark is coming into the town. The Israelites are cheering, yay, we're going to win. The Philistines, oh no, fight like our lives depend on it because we're going to get crushed by this ark. Now, how many people think the Israelites are going to win? Any guess? How many people think the Philistines are going to win? Right? And again, we were just told by Hollywood that if you carried the ark, you'd be invincible. How many people think Hollywood could possibly get it wrong? Anyone? Mind blowing. Okay. Well, let's see what happens. Verse 10. So the Philistines fought desperately, and Israel was defeated again. The slaughter was great. 30,000 Israelite soldiers died that day. The survivors turned and fled to their tents. The ark was captured, and then we learn two gentlemen, Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were killed. Not only did the ark not lead them to victory, it actually led them to a humiliating, shameful defeat. What on earth went wrong? And again, you see this idea that they just saw this ark. They didn't ask how God was going to save them. It was how God's box was going to save them, right? They took it not just like as a secret weapon, but as like a lucky charm, right? A pretty powerful rabbit's foot or something. Well, listen to the tragedy that follows. In the next scene, we meet two people, the death of one and the birth of another. Gentleman by the name of Eli and a baby by the name of Ichabod. So again, after this defeat, we're told that there's this messenger who had to run back and relay to the tabernacle the news of what just happened. Now, at that time, the high priest, and who was also the leading judge at that time, a guy by the name of Eli. Eli, it was his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who we just learned had died, and they were the ones who were going to take after his mantle after he led. And the one thing we learn about them is they were terrible, terrible, despicable sons. But we're told that Eli was just, he was at his wit's end. He said he couldn't wait in the tabernacle. He had to go out into the street waiting news. And what he was most worried about was not how the Israelites fared, not how his sons did, but what happened with the ark. And so the messenger finally reached him. And actually, the Bible says that his heart was shaking. Literally, he was shaking with anxiety over what would take place with the ark. And I think he had an idea the way they were using the ark was not the way God intended. Verse 18, when the messenger mentioned what had happened to the ark of God, Eli fell backwards from his seat beside the gate. He broke his neck and died, for he was old and overweight. He had been Israel's judge for 40 years, right? And you get that picture, goes, Eli, the Israelites have lost. 30,000 men are died. Your sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And he's like, but what about the ark? It's gone. And that finished him. Then there's this other little tragic detail that's put in there. One of Eli's daughter-in-laws, married to one of his sons, was pregnant at that time. And when she heard news that her husband and her father-in-law had died and that the ark was captured, she went into childbirth, and then she died in childbirth. But before she died, she said, I want you to name the kid Ichabod. Like, why would we name him Ichabod? And she said this, because the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. And again, the word Ichabod means quite literally, the glory has gone. There's a picture of Ichabod Crane. So it's a little bit worse than Elvis leaving the building. In this intention, it's the glory of God has left the land of Israel. Now, you would think, okay, isn't this supposed to be the super weapon? Isn't this, where's its power? How is God going to use this box? Well, it's now where the ark of God really comes into its own, where you start to see its power. Chapter 5, and you see the ark versus one of the gods of the Philistines. Chapter 3 begins this way, and the Philistines captured the ark of God, and they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. That's one of these major cities of 5 major cities in the land of the Philistines. They carried the ark of God into the temple of Dagon and placed it beside the idol of Dagon. Just give you a little context. back in that time, again, the different nations, the different people would have their different gods. And often when they went in war with one another, sometimes different armies, similar to carrying the ark, and they would carry a different standard representing their god. And they would see it not just as armies fighting each other, but literally the god clashing and fighting one another. When we hear that word desecration, it's this idea. Often what would happen in those ancient battles is if one of the armies was able to capture the standard or the image of the other god, they would do terrible things to try to humiliate that god, just basically saying our god's bigger and stronger than your god. So that by them taking this ark, this representation of God's power, placing it in the temple of their god, they're like, it's a way of desecrating, it's a way of humiliating, and they're putting it before their god. So now this box has to worship Dagon. Now here's another little just cool sort of aside. One of the things that I learned. Now, if you see a picture of Dagon, he looks often like half fish, half man in the representation. And for a lot of people thought that Dagon was a fish god. Now, most people don't hold that view now, but he was sort of the chief god of the Philistines. So if you think of, oftentimes when you think of the Philistines' god Baal, this would be, people think Dagon was the father of Baal. So kind of, you think of Greek mythology, Zeus is the chief god, but Kronos is his father. That's kind of like Dagon, that idea. But here's the cool thing. Because he was also known as a fish god, any Aquaman fans? Apparently, Dagon was one of the arch kind of villains of Aquaman. So I think that's kind of cool. But listen to this. After the Philistines captured the ark, they took it in front of the Philistine battle. They carried the ark of the God's temple and placed it beside an idol of Dagon. But verse 3, but when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the ark of the Lord. And basically, it's this picture that it's Dagon, the god of the Philistines, who's now bowing and worshiping not the God of Israel, but the representation of where he does, just the box that reveals his power. But that's not it. So they took Dagon and put him in place again, but the next morning, the same thing happened. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. This time his head and hands were broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. So then the next day it's turned up a notch, right? His head's gone, his wisdom, his power, his command center is destroyed. He quite literally is disarmed, right? He is powerless. And then remember the way the temples were done, there'd be the most holy area. He's been removed. He's been pushed outside of the holy place of that temple, which has now left the ark. So again, he's now humiliated the God of the Philistines. But the ark wasn't just done with the God of the Philistines. Now he's going to turn his attention against the Philistines themselves. Now, if you remember from that video clip from Indiana Jones, it said that the ark could level mountains and lay waste entire regions. That's not recorded in the Bible, but this is what is recorded in the Bible, and most people probably won't see this one coming. Then the Lord's heavy hand struck the people of Ashdod and the nearby villages with a plague of tumors. How many people saw tumors coming? We're also told there was also, they were overrun with rats. When the people realized what was happening, they cried out, "We can't keep the ark of God of Israel here any longer. He is against us. We will all be destroyed along with Dagon, our God." So they called together the rulers of the Philistine towns and asked, "What should we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" So the leaders came up with this brilliant plan. He said, let's move it from Ashdod and let's take it to another city. Let's take it to the people of Gath. So let's see what happened when it was taken to Gath. Verse 9, but when the ark arrived at Gath, the Lord's heavy hand fell on its men, young and old. He struck them with a plague of tumors, and there was a great panic. So then what's the next great plan? I know, let's take it to Ekron. Let's take it to the next city. Let's see how that's going to happen. But the people of Ekron were pretty wise. When the people of Ekron, verse 10, saw it was coming, they cried out, "They are bringing the ark of God of Israel here to kill us too." The people summoned the Philistine rulers again and begged them, "Please send the ark of God of Israel back to its own country, or it will kill us all, for the deadly plague from God has already begun." And great fear was sweeping across the town. Those who didn't die were afflicted with tumors, and the cry from the town rose to heaven. So again, they realize now, okay, we got to get rid of this thing. What looked like this wonderful victory was now turning into this humiliating defeat for the Philistines. So the next scene, this is chapter 6, it's their idea of how do we get this ark back to Israel. Now, this is kind of where it gets a little bit curious, because they realize, okay, not only do we have to send it back, but we can't send it back empty-handed. We have to send it back with a gift. We have to recognize our own sin in it. Now, Philistine was known, there were 5 rulers and there were 5 chief cities. So they decided what we're going to do as a representative from each of us rulers, from each of us, these major cities, we're going to give a gift to go back. And what they came up with was the plan to send it back with 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats to represent the plague that was with. So they carved this. Now, I kind of laughed at this. I chuckled at this because I don't know how, I would think it's pretty cool if you see that there to make a golden rat. A golden tumor, that sounds like my pottery class when I grew up. When you do remember having pottery art class and what did you make? And it doesn't look like anything. And I would think my teacher said, that kind of looks like a tumor. It's not a tumor. That would be like, we'll put, Alan is very crafty in a good sense of the way. He would be in charge of the rats. I'd be the one who's in charge of making the blobs. But anyway, they send them out, but there's another level with this that goes, and they said, before we just are too hasty, and maybe this is all chance, maybe we should do one more test to see if this really is from God. And they said, let's just harness this ark to 2 cows and send it. And if God wants it back, the cows, he'll just lead the cows to the land of Israel. But then they add a little twist. He said, why don't we harness it to 2 cows that have never had anything, they've never carried anything before. In fact, 2 cows that have just calved. And if we set this thing on and they don't turn back to go to their calves, but just start marching towards Israel, then we know this is God's plan, God's doing, and he wants the ark back in his land. So the cows, they go and they actually march toward the land of Israel, cross the border, and they come to a town called Beth Shemesh. In verse 13 of chapter 6, we read this. The people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting wheat in the valley, and when they saw the ark, they were overjoyed. The ark came into the field of a man named Joshua and stopped beside a large rock. So the people broke up the wood of the cart for fire and killed the cows and sacrificed them to the Lord as a burnt offering. You kind of feel bad for the cows. I do. Several men of the tribe of Levi lifted the ark of the Lord and the chest containing the gold rats and the gold tumors from the cart and placed them on the large rocks. Many sacrifices and burnt offerings were offered to the Lord that day by the people of Beth Shemesh. And then we're told this, the large rock at Beth Shemesh, where they set the ark of the Lord, still stands in the field of Joshua as a witness to what happened there. And it's kind of cool if you actually visit Beth Shemesh, there's a couple contenders, but they actually believe, these might be the possible rocks that it was set upon. Now you'd think, okay, happy ending, everybody lives happily ever after, the ark has been returned, the glory of God is returned. But then in verse 19, we read these words, and if only the Nazis had read their Bibles in Indiana Jones, their faces might not have been melted. Verse 19, but the Lord killed 70 men from Beth Shemesh because they looked into the ark of the Lord. Right? Now, it doesn't tell us how the Lord killed them. I'd like to think that their faces melted. That's my best guesses. But then listen to this. And the people mourned greatly because of what the Lord had done. And they said this, who is able to stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? They cried out, where can we send the ark from here? So all of a sudden, though the ark is returned to the people and all they're celebrating, but their celebrating changed really fast. Eventually, we hear this, chapter 7, verse 2. The ark remained in Kiriath Jearim, another town a little along the way, but it stayed there for a long time, 20 years in all. During that time, all Israel mourned because it seemed the Lord had abandoned them. And there's this key point. The ark leaves the land of Israel, and they're like, the glory of God has departed. The ark comes back, and they're like, the glory hasn't returned. Right? They're missing that the ark is just a representation of the power and of the glory of God, but not necessarily itself. In fact, the story doesn't really end with a happy ending until we get to chapter 7 and realize the power of God actually is displayed in the repentance of his people, not in the power of a box. Then Samuel, so again, he was this final judge who filled the void after Eli died. And he said to the people of Israel, if you want to return to the Lord with all your hearts, get rid of your foreign gods and your images of the Ashtaroth. Turn your hearts to the Lord and obey him alone. Then he will rescue you from the Philistines. So the Israelites got rid of their images of Baal and Ashtoreth and worshiped only the Lord. Then we're also told that they put on sackcloth and declared a fast and they repented. And it's this amazing thing. One of the things is they just saw this box, again, as a lucky charm. And in fact, they treated this box of God, this Ark of the Covenant, the same way the Philistines and the surrounding nations treated the images of their God, that they had to kind of maneuver and manipulate for their own purposes. And God says, if you want to see my power, don't start with the box, but start with your own hearts. And then I love this again. It does end with a happy ending. Verse 13. So there was another battle, and then it's summed up this way. So the Philistines were subdued and didn't invade Israel again for some time. And throughout Samuel's lifetime, the Lord's powerful hand was raised against the Philistines. The Israelite villages near Ekron and Gath that the Philistines had captured were restored to Israel, along with the rest of the territory that the Philistines had taken. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Again, that's sort of a collection of all the different surrounding nations during those days. But what are we going to make of this? And I have this personal kind of weary whenever you tell a story and just simply end it, well, the moral of the story is this, right? It sometimes is a little bit reductionistic. It's a little bit too simplistic. And there's lots of things we can learn and get. Sometimes it's just to appreciate and enjoy and allow it to impact you. You know, as a kid, when I came across this story just after watching Indiana Jones, I mean, I can pull out 1,000 things that I would never have pulled out as a kid. As a kid, it just got me excited about the Bible. And I got me excited about this, mysterious magical box that I kind of compared to like kryptonite in a Superman gun. It was just cool, right? It had this cool power over people. It drew me in. But maybe if I was to simplify it as simple as possible, is consider it this way, that the box of God reveals you cannot put God into a box, right? He cannot be contained within a box. You can't box him in, right? And here's this incredible picture of this story is that in one sense, the Israelites, they honored the ark, but they didn't actually honor the God in which the ark represented. In fact, they thought that they could manipulate and use it to their whims and to their advantages. And the incredible story here is God, he uses the ark, he uses the box to rescue and to save his people. But it was absolutely not the way they drew it up. It was absolutely not the way that they had expected it to happen. It was done not on their terms, but it was done on God's terms, in God's ways. It's a reminder, too, that again, the God that we honor, the God that we serve, the God that we worship is a holy, holy God. He is a powerful God. He is not to be trifled with. And if we're honest, sometimes even in our Christian walk, in our Christian lives, we're not much better than the Israelites. And we think we can twist and we can manipulate God to our whims. I kind of sometimes actually kind of sometimes feel gross and icky when I sometimes go into Christian bookstores. I don't know, is that kind of weird to confess? I remember hearing this line, it's filled with Jesus junk. you know it just, God's been reduced down to little trinkets that we put on our fridges and on our walls and stuff. But oftentimes, you go and you look in book sections and just say, if you just, say this prayer this certain way, then God's going to activate this way. Here's 5 simple steps. There could be some really good principles, good things, but if we just enact this, then everything's going to work out. Right? Sometimes we can just kind of watch those greasy preachers on television, and they're like, if you just send me this money in this offering, and I'll send you back this thing, and God's going to do this work. It's kind of gross. But we just think, and then we do these things, we do these tricks, and we're like the people of Israel. It's like, okay, God, I'm doing what you said. I'm shifting. Now you got to keep your side of the bargain. And the reality in our lives is sometimes we do these things, we try them out, and it's like the glory of God has still left our lives. Why isn't he here? Why isn't he helping? And the reminder is God's going to work. He's going to save, but it's going to be on his terms, not our own terms. And maybe the first place to start is, instead of trying to twist God's arm or making demands, is start with your own heart. Start with your own repentance. And here's one of the marvelous pictures of God's salvation. Because he's going to do it on his terms, he can do it any way he chooses. And we've got to trust his way, whether it be with a golden box, or maybe more importantly, and more miraculously, through a wooden cross. I'm going to call the worship team to close our service.